The town of Derby, Montana had seen its share of storms, but nothing prepared anyone for the sight they witnessed that afternoon. A 12,000-pound stallion came thundering across the open pasture, his body stretched low to the ground, his ears pinned flat, his hooves throwing dirt high into the air. He was aimed straight at Elena Vance. People on the ridge shouted at her to run. They waved their arms and yelled her name, but Elena didn't move. She didn't even lift a hand. She simply stood in the path of that charging giant, as if she trusted something no one else could see. And she did. A secret buried under 10 long years. But that moment wasn't where the real story began. It began a decade earlier on a bitter November morning at a livestock auction outside Reno, Nevada. Snowflakes drifted sideways in the wind. The pens smelled of wet hay, diesel smoke, and fear. Horses shifted restlessly behind metal rails as tired buyers moved from pen to pen. Elena was 22 then, fresh out of vet school, broke, and doing her best to help a neighbor load cattle. She had no business buying a horse. She could barely keep gas in her truck. But all of that changed when the handler pulled a thin, beat-up colt into the ring. Lot 409. He was shaking from cold and weakness. His ribs stood out like sharp lines against his muddy coat. A gash on his hind leg oozed infection, and the rain rot had eaten patches out of his hair. He looked like he'd been forgotten by the world. The auctioneer called out his age and condition with no more interest than reading a grocery list. A kill buyer, one everyone in the building recognized, lifted his paddle. The man leaned back in his greasy canvas jacket, chewing on a toothpick, ready to buy the colt cheap and send him across the border for slaughter. When he bid $150, Elena felt something tighten in her chest. She looked up at the colt. For one brief second, he lifted his head and met her eyes. They weren't angry or wild. They were begging. 200, she called out before she could think. The kill buyer smirked and raised to $250. Elena pulled out her phone. Her bank account held exactly $312. Rent money, grocery money, everything. 300, she said. The kill buyer shrugged, then turned away. The auctioneer slammed the gavel. Sold. Elena's neighbor, Bill Henderson, gave her a look like she'd lost her mind. That colt won't make it through winter, he said. His ribs are deep as canyons. Then that's his name, Elena whispered as she signed the check. Canyon. The first months were a battle. Canyon didn't trust men at all, lashed out at any sudden movement, and guarded his food like he expected everything to be taken from him. Elena slept on a mattress in the barn for 3 weeks straight until he grew used to her presence. She cleaned his wound daily with honey and saline. She rubbed salve on his skin. She hand-fed him grain scoop by scoop until his trembling stopped. Slowly his coat brightened from dull brown to copper. His eyes softened from fear to curiosity. His ribs faded under new muscle. And one day he simply started following her everywhere. No rope, no halter, just trust. By the time Canyon turned 5, he wasn't a horse to her anymore. He was her shadow. When she fixed fences, he watched the tree line. When she cried after her father passed away, Canyon lowered his head and touched her shoulder until the sobs eased. Their bond was a quiet, powerful language that didn't need words, but all of it was threatened 10 years later. The Vance Ranch was collapsing under drought, rising hay costs, and most of all, a developer named Silas Thorne. Silas had money that seemed endless. He bought ranches, tore down homes, and turned the valley into playgrounds for rich tourists. The Vance land held the water rights. Silas wanted it badly. For 6 months, he pushed Elena to sell. He showed up uninvited, wearing spotless cowboy boots, talking like he cared about her future. "You're drowning in debt," he told her. "Take the $3 million. Leave this life." "My father is buried on that hill," Elena replied. "This ranch is not for sale." Silas smiled in a way that felt colder than the November wind. Everyone has a breaking point. Quote, That was when things began to unravel. Gates she locked at night were wide open by morning. Cattle wandered onto the road. The sheriff gave her a citation and told her to, quote, keep her fences tight. Water troughs were smashed. A dead coyote was left on her porch swing. Someone wanted her scared and worn down. But the worst change wasn't the fences. It was Canyon. The gentle horse grew watchful. He patrolled the fence line near the road. He pinned his ears at strange trucks. He charged the meter reader's vehicle one morning, teeth bared, hooves striking the rails so hard the wood splintered. He's turning dangerous, her friend Sarah warned. If he hurts someone, the county won't give you a choice. He's not dangerous, Elena whispered, resting her hand against Canyon's trembling neck. He's telling me something. One evening, Silas arrived again, rolling down his window at the main gate. Canyon didn't run to greet him. Instead, he stood far back, staring not at Silas, but at the thick woods at the edge of the property. His eyes were white around the edges, his body stiff. Last chance, Silas said. Accidents happen out here. As he drove away, Canyon let out a shrill cry unlike anything Elena had heard from him before. A warning. A promise. 3 days later, the storm rolled in, the day everything would collide. The storm reached the valley fast. By early afternoon, the sky had turned a deep, unsettled purple. The wind roared across the open plains, bending the sagebrush and pushing dust through the air like a rolling wave. Elena was alone in the south pasture, nearly a mile from the house, working to repair a section of barbed wire she had found cleanly cut. Her truck sat far behind her on the higher ground where the mud wouldn't swallow it. She wiped sweat from her forehead and bent down again to twist the wire shut. The wind howled so loudly she almost didn't hear the twigs snap behind her. She straightened up slowly and turned, nothing but tall grass whipping in the storm. Still, an uneasy feeling crawled along her spine. Something was wrong. She picked up her pliers and took a step back. The wind carried another sharp crack from her left. Elena's heartbeat stumbled. She dropped the tools and started toward her truck at a brisk walk. When she heard a third snap, closer than before, she ran. Her boots slid across the slick mud as she pushed herself forward, breath tight, hands trembling. She wasn't sure who was out there. She didn't need to be. Silas Thorne's threat echoed in her mind with every step. Accidents happen out here. Then a figure stepped out from behind a cluster of scrub oak trees. The man wore a ski mask and camouflage. In one hand he held a heavy rope. In the other, a high-voltage cattle prod crackled with blue sparks. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His intentions were written in the still, icy way he walked toward her. Elena stumbled backward, slipped, and fell hard into the mud. The man closed in. The storm roared overhead, drowning out the sound of her breathing. She kicked at the ground and tried to stand, but he raised the prod, ready to strike. Then the earth shook. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't the storm. It was hooves. Elena turned her head and saw a blur of copper flying through the darkening rain. Canyon. The giant stallion was charging with a speed and force she had never seen, his mane streaming like a black banner behind him. His eyes were wide and burning with a fierce focus that did not look like the horse she knew. He wasn't coming for her. He was coming for something behind her. The masked man saw him too. His body stiffened as he tried to brace the cattle prod. "Run!" Elena yelled at him, but her voice was swallowed by the storm. Canyon was getting closer. 30 yards. 20. 10. Elena froze. For one frightening moment, she thought Canyon had finally snapped under the pressure of fear and months of tension. She thought he would barrel straight through her. But as she looked into his eyes, even at that distance, she felt something else. Not anger, not confusion, a deep, carved-in trust. She stayed exactly where she was. The hooves thundered over the mud. At the last heartbeat, Canyon spun his entire weight to the left. His powerful body slid through the soaked ground, passing inches from Elena. Mud sprayed over her face and clothes, but he didn't touch her. He never meant to. He struck the masked man like a living battering ram. His shoulder slammed into the man's chest with the force of a charging bull. The man flew through the air and hit a cottonwood tree so hard the bark splintered. The cattle prod landed in the mud with a hiss. Before the man could move, Canyon planted his front hooves on either side of his chest, trapping him to the ground. The stallion lowered his head until his breath was inches from the man's mask. A deep, rumbling warning rose from his chest. It vibrated through the soaked earth. Elena scrambled to her knees and gasped for breath. She crawled closer, watching Canyon hold the man in place with perfect, terrifying control. "Easy, boy," she whispered, placing her hand on Canyon's shaking shoulder. "You did good." She ripped the ski mask off the man's head. It was Trent Hayes, a ranch hand who'd worked odd jobs for Silas Thorne. His face twisted in pain and fear. "He said it would be simple," Trent gasped. "Cut the fences, scare you, make you sign. I didn't know he wanted this." Elena stumbled to her feet, grabbed her phone from her coat pocket, and dialed 911 with trembling hands. "I need Deputy Miller at Vance Ranch," she said. "South pasture, intruder with a weapon. He's restrained." "How is he restrained?" the operator asked. Elena looked at Canyon, who hadn't moved an inch. "By a very large horse. And he's not in the mood to negotiate. Please hurry." Minutes later, sirens cut through the storm. Deputy Miller's truck slid to a stop at the pasture's edge. He ran toward them, boots splashing through the mud. When he saw Canyon pinning Trent to the ground, he froze. "Lord help me," Miller whispered. "That horse is better trained than half the deputies in the county." Elena stepped in and touched Canyon's neck again. The stallion shifted just enough for Miller to grab Trent and haul him out from under the huge chestnut body. Trent surrendered immediately, breaking into a stream of panicked confessions. Everything pointed back to Silas Thorne. The rain soaked everyone to the bone, but the truth poured out faster than the storm. By nightfall, Silas Thorne's plan had fully unraveled, and Canyon, the thin, dying colt from a Reno auction, had just saved Elena Vance's life. By the time the storm broke the next morning, the whole valley knew what Canyon had done. Deputy Miller had worked late into the night gathering statements, taking photos, and locking Trent Hayes in a county cell. The moment Trent realized Canyon wasn't coming after him again, the man spilled every secret he knew. His trembling confession told the full story. The cut fences, the dead coyote, the smashed trough, the plan to corner Elena in the pasture and scare her into signing away the ranch. Silas Thorne had orchestrated everything. Miller didn't waste a minute. Before sunrise, he and 2 state troopers drove straight to Jackson Hole, where Silas was staying at a luxury lodge. The man opened the door in crisp pajamas, annoyed by the early hour, but the annoyance faded the second Miller held up a recording of Trent's confession. When Miller showed the photos of the cattle prod, the cut fence, and the bruises Trent had suffered from Canyon's impact, Silas's pale face turned gray. By noon, Silas Thorne was in handcuffs. The charges were serious: conspiracy to commit assault, coercion, criminal trespass, and attempted extortion. News spread through Derby like wildfire. Some folks whispered, some cheered, and some shook their heads at the greed that had driven a man to destroy a ranch older than the town itself. But for Elena, the days that followed were a blur. She was exhausted, shaky, and overwhelmed. The fear she had held inside for months finally loosened its grip. She walked through the house like someone learning to breathe again. Canyon stayed near her constantly, watching every sound, every shift in the wind, as if the threat might return. The community didn't let her stand alone. Mrs. Peterson from the diner brought meals every evening. The feed store owner extended her credit. Bill Henderson, the old rancher who once warned her Canyon would never make it through winter, arrived with tools and wire. He spent 2 full days fixing every fence line around the property. When Elena tried to pay him, he shook his head. "You saved that horse," he said, tightening a post. "And he saved you. World needs more folks who stick by their animals that way." The courtroom hearing that came next was packed. The prosecutor wanted the judge to understand the depth of Thorne's intent. Elena stood to testify, her hands steady, even though her legs trembled. She told the story of Canyon from the beginning, how she'd found him sick, trembling, and forgotten, how she'd slept in the barn to help him trust again, how he'd become her shadow and her protector. Then she described the moment he charged in the storm. The room fell silent as she spoke. He was coming at full speed, she said. He looked wild, but he wasn't. He wasn't coming for me. He saw the danger I didn't see. He warned me for weeks. I didn't understand until that moment. Quote, the defense lawyer tried to twist her words. Ms. Vance, isn't it true a frightened horse can trample anything in its path? Isn't it possible he nearly killed you in confusion? No, Elena said firmly. If Canyon wanted to harm me, he had 1,000 chances in 10 years. I trusted him because we built that trust every day. When he charged, I didn't run because I knew him better than that. He wasn't confused. He was choosing. Her words settled over the room like dust after a stampede, heavy, unforgettable. Silas Thorne, seeing the jury's faces, chose to take a plea deal. He received jail time and was ordered to pay a massive civil settlement to Elena. The money was enough to erase every debt piled on the ranch, enough to rebuild, enough to secure the Vance land for generations. The valley breathed easier the day Silas was taken away. For the first time in months, Elena walked across her property without fear sitting in her chest like a stone. She repaired the last broken boards on the barn herself, humming softly as Canyon stood close by, watching her with calm, wise eyes. Spring came early that year. The pastures turned green again. Water flowed stronger through the creek beds. One clear afternoon, Elena stood in the middle of the open field, letting the wind brush across her face. Canyon walked up beside her, his copper coat glowing in the sunlight. She rested her cheek against his neck, breathing in the warm, familiar scent of hay and horse. Her hands moved gently over the old, healed scar on his hind leg, the same wound she treated the first night she brought him home. You saved me right back, she whispered. Canyon didn't move. He simply stood with her, quiet and steady, the way he had for 10 years. Word of what he did became something like legend in Derby. Folks came to see the horse who had once been ribs and fear but grew into the valley's silent guardian. Children whispered stories about him. Ranchers nodded with respect. And Elena, now free from fear and debt, rebuilt the ranch with the strength she had nearly forgotten she had. Canyon never became a working ranch horse again. He didn't need to. He was something more, a reminder of loyalty that doesn't fade. A giant with a gentle heart, the one who stood between danger and the woman who once knelt beside him in a cold auction barn and refused to give up. 10 years ago, Elena saved Canyon's life. On the day of the storm, Canyon saved her future.